Alright, ladies and gentlemen, today's video features a unit analysis on a watermelon. It is summertime. I do like the sweet taste of watermelon. Wait, what?
Let the lesson begin.
On a more serious note, welcome back guys to another Fire Emblem Heroes video. I'm your host slash teach, Akariss. Today's video is going to talk about Arete. Now I'm a little bit overdue on this one, but she is definitely a unit that I'm going to invest in personally. So of course there might be a little bit of bias here, but generally speaking, I'm going to be objective with trying to provide a solid analysis of this character and how she fits into the current Fire Emblem Heroes metagame. I do actually think it's a great freebie. Maybe that might be a little bit contentious, but I do actually think it's a good one because if you just generally look at the freebies of Red Ranged, there's not that many. There literally isn't that many. It's basically Valentine's Titania, who is a Tempest Trials, and she has a different stat spread. Titania, I believe, was more speed-oriented. And SM Erica, but only one off as a 5-star exclusive. Now I'm going to make sure I try to provide this video with as much reasoning as possible to why you may consider investing into her, or potentially why you shouldn't, because that could definitely help if you haven't already, of course. But if you haven't, then maybe this could help you choose one way or the other. One thing I want to note in the context of this video is that I will actually be talking mostly about Aether Defense, because that is definitely the place where I would recommend thinking about using her or not using her. And with Aether Defense in mind, I have recently updated started the foundations of a really good document, really long, detailed document on Patreon. So if you're considering supporting the channel, maybe go hit that up and see for yourself. If nothing else, you could definitely hit up Discord through the use of Patreon, and I do cover it in Discord streams. So if that's of your interest and you really feel like you got to improve your defense, then there's definitely detailed resources that I've been working on behind the scenes. Thank you guys for even considering. With that being said, let's talk about Arete. So, Arete is a red tome cav. I've actually wanted a red bow cav, but a red tome will do pretty well, as we will soon see through my analysis of this. Her stat spread is actually not too bad, although I would prefer defense over res, but that's okay because having high res does mean you get to avoid stuff like Tamari more often, or sabotage and that sort of stuff if you tend to kind of use it that way and then pump up defense. It's one of the big reasons that I actually like Luis as a bow cav and wasn't a huge fan of Rolf, and I guess to a lesser extent Leone, but Leone is pretty solid. So Arete is a GHB, which does actually have some advantages, some pros and cons that I'm going to talk about listed on the left over there. So being a GHB does mean that you get more copies, the grail cost is less, and in the distant future we would likely see a weapon refine or preference weapon given to her. So as an investment, long term, this does pretty well. She does come back through a rerun on the arena bonuses as well, and I think also through AR as bonus at least once a year or something like that. So those are some pretty decent benefits. Her stat spread is pretty good, especially for the way that I'm going to recommend using her. And as I mentioned, no other ranged red freebies. She comes with Glaciers, Res Push, Res Ploy, and I believe Rauorblade, but like honestly, who cares about Rauorblade? That's not gonna matter at all. Being red, I do actually think she complements the other freebies really well of the range cav caliber, which is Reinhardt and Cecilia, especially on defense, but I guess in offense or PvE you could do it that way too. The attack stat is actually very solid as well at a 36 base. No super boon, but still very good. If you end up using a boon for attack, 39 is nothing to slouch at. Again, as I mentioned, where you'll definitely see some use out of her. You'll see why the attack stat is important in a moment. So, the problems, though, that I feel are going to hold people back from investing into Arete is, one, she's going to need a lot of investment, and that's going to come through like feathers or premium skills that may not be that easy to come down to. Generally speaking, this is kind of like depends how you use her, but I do think you will probably want to invest hard into her for some skills to make good use out of her. Second, and unfortunately a unfortunate, like a pretty weird consequence, is that literally dual Sigurd, dual Lif, and legendary Sigurd are gonna be better if you have them. So if you have them, then you don't care about Arete, and this is a fairly easy no invest, because those ones will be better. That's not to say she couldn't also be on the team with those units in a different role, but generally speaking, if you have any of those other three on defense, then you probably should be using them instead in most cases. And we'll get to this. So first build that you could consider as like a budget investment would be just giving her a Blade Tome with Wind Sweep on defense with ARD Speed Res. Now this is still a fairly decent investment at about 80k, and potentially if you don't have Wind Sweep fodder, you could be using Grails here. But a Blade Tome is actually, in my opinion, a great way to use her. And as you'll see at near the end of the video, or actually, I'll probably show you guys a bit earlier, but one of the biggest reasons that I think Blade works really well on her, and not necessarily on Ryan or Cecilia, not Blade, but like why it's more important to her than those other two, is the existence of the preference tomes. Because Arete doesn't have a preference tome, this means that you actually will consider using some of the inheritable tomes. And Blade Tome lends really well to the more recent Dark meta. So what I want to show you guys here is my defense. And as you'll notice, I go into way more detail on this on Patreon, and I've talked about it on Twitch and Discord streams as well. But essentially my defense is easily about 80-90% win rate, and there's some mechanics there that really help it out. But Arete would fit into that team very well, and that team is fairly budget. There's no auto recovery, there's no crazy good duo hero, duo Mia's, whatever, compared to like dual Sigurd, Lif, or Peony. One very important mechanic that Blade Tome works really well here is the fact that the 7th unit can basically end turn, clear its own debuffs, and therefore get going. So what you'll see on my defense layout there is Reinhardt is the 7th unit and a Dancer Eldigan being right behind him. This is really important because if Arete is the 7th unit with the Blade Tome and receiving beginning of turn buffs through like Honed Cavalry or gaps or openings or whatever like that, you can essentially fully buff her without any sort of counterplay from your opponent. This literally means that you can have her get 6 to all stats, remove any tactics from debuff, and steamroll down through Pathfinder, especially in Dark Season, because I would recommend it on Dark Season. Steamroll through the middle and do a huge amount of damage even to blue units. And if you combine this with Wind Sweep, of course that's even further unobstructed, and she's going to end up doing a huge nuke. The fact that Reinhardt has Dire Thunder and Cecilia has her Tome of Order means that they're not going to be using Blade Tomes, but Arete gets the luxury of doing that. You could technically get a Ryan or Cecilia or any other kind of cav that could do this too, but the thing is she's a free red tome, she has a great attack stat, and the 7-slot mechanic works really well with a Blade Tome to basically super buff them and create this menacing, threatening unit, which is why I really do think that if you, let's say, don't have a good red unit, like let's say Elwood or Sigurd, as you can see from here, or Kemp isn't really needed on your team, then Arete fits into that role pretty well. Of course, there's also extra threat because she's ranged, whereas Sigurd is like 3 movements, potentially 4 with Pathfinder. She can threaten even more spots because she's a ranged cav. So this is definitely one of the greatest ways I think you could use her, but that's not to say it's the only way. Of course, if you don't want to use the 7-slot mechanic because maybe you have auto recovery on your team, then Fox is pretty catch-all, generalist, fairly good tome. I mean, lowering your enemy stats by 4 to all stats really helps close the gap in terms of those differences. And her stats and her speed ends up being fairly good as a result of this to definitely take care of, let's say, the tanks who don't have a speed stat, and you can get a Wind Sweep off of them. So I do think this ends up being a good option as well if she's not the 7th slot for Blade. A final way you can consider using her is, of course, with a Raven Tome. So if you don't have, let's say, Cecilia on your defense team, then her with Raven isn't terrible. You could actually run TA in the A slot as well. You could run Deflect Missile. You could definitely, depending on her position, consider using her this way as well. And because of her high attack stat, it scales really well with Raven and potentially TA as well. So Again, three different ways to use her, and I think all three are viable. Now, if you go all the way with high investments here, then it does end up looking pretty good. I'm talking like ARD attack speed 4, again, Blade Tome, and all the merges and flowers here if you use her during our bonus season. This is a unit that can easily hit about 80-90 attack with Blade Tome buffs, even further beyond, if you consider mythics as well. And that is quite a threat to consider that a lot of tanks, or in general just units, will not want to take. This actually is pretty funny because if you think about Uller being like a blue with low res, even Arete buffed up is going to hurt her pretty badly. So finally, of course, Raven as well. As I mentioned, you could go with like extra attack and defense, deflect missile, and fully investment. This looks really good. So yeah, if you are wondering where I'm using this unit builder from, this is from, I believe, the Shadow. Link for the unit builder will be in the description below. Credit to him putting this together. I think it's really nice that it can use like an attack, special attack animation to really show the investment level here. But hopefully this helps you out, guys, and has you thinking about maybe to consider into Arete or just kind of like team comp creation in general. If you want even more details or how I go about creating this sort of stuff, then consider the Patreon and supporting content that way. That means a lot. Other useful links right now going forward is going to be my Instagram, where I'm going to be doing more social stuff, more RL stuff. You want to follow me there. Of course, Twitch streams happen on the weekend, and on Discord streams as well, which is, if you support the channel, you can definitely check me out more behind the scenes there. So thank you guys for watching. Give the video a thumbs up, sub if you haven't already. Love you all. See you in the next one. Much love. Peace.
It's over.